A quick talk through on where the UAEs sit with the important elements of permissions and the what ifs. Now, if we look on that right hand side, this is what we want. This is when we're looking at coaching, we're looking at the athletes. We want them to be really clear on the success. The expectations in my head is exactly what's in theirs, and they can just go for it. They can focus on that success, they can stay on it, they can commit to it. When they're reviewing, they stay consistent to the critical elements, and importantly, whatever they say, they get to the solution if they need a change, and they apply it. If nothing needs changing, they're recognizing that, what are we doing so great, and they commit to it after the conversation. So that's that point, remember, in the tutorials where don't tell me, show me. And we want to get to a point where us as coaches, we're just listening, and the information they're all sharing, all involved, specific to the situation, and then they go out. The left hand side is often the reality that we're dealing with there, where they don't focus on what you ask them. Sometimes you get frustrated where you think, hang on, my interpretation of success I'm not seeing. My expectations of what is acceptable, unacceptable, exceptional, I'm not seeing. Some of the players might be thinking, well, I think this is okay. And there becomes this confusion, and then it ends up, actually, you start taking over the conversations because you're not hearing the information that they want to. So now you start telling and reminding, and now they start to get disengaged, and we develop the very environment that we don't want. Now, if you go through each of them on that left-hand side, I'm sure you're smiling at some of these, go, yeah, actually that happens. Now, the UAEs, with the permissions and the what if, help move us to the right-hand side. So I just want to go through the specifics of them and some of the concerns with them that we've picked up on the tutorial. The UAEs we've been talking about in the tutorials, there's some key elements to this. One is it's a pre-agreement. So when we work through this journey, there are elements that we will commonly have within our sport. We need the UAEs around them. So it's a pre-agreement. It's not something we try and fix in the moment. That resolves a lot of the issues. Also, it provides clarity within the expectations that we have in our head to share them with everybody else. Now, the other element to that is it's providing that clarity for everyone involved. So when we're asking them to review, actually there's a reference point. When we're asking them to be live and adapting and support each other at rule 1 and 2, there's a reference point. And as we've talked about before, it's technical, tactical, and the behavioral. You know, the principle of the need-centered approach is it's the behaviors first. If we nail those down and we put energy into them, then everything else becomes easier. But we still need that element on the technical, tactical, and that could be the whole point of when we lose a ball, what would be unacceptable for us, what would be acceptable, what would be exceptional. Sometimes, as we've talked about, there isn't always an exceptional. There's always an acceptable, there's always an unacceptable. The reason for that exceptional is we're looking at stretch. So we want them to grow, to become better. And also, if you've got a mixed ability team, which most of us have, let's face it, there will be some where there's a level of range of ability. Now, we want individual focus that we've talked about in the past, and I'm going to do another short on that as well, just to delve in a bit. But also then we've got that team where we say, look, within our defense as a team, we need to still have our fundamentals of what will be acceptable and unacceptable for us, but also that strive for exceptional. So that's the whole point of UAEs. Now, this is a question that we've picked up a lot, as you can see, when we go through the tutorials on the end of chapter conversations, reflections, but also in some of the comments. Now, they'll be time consuming depending on your interpretation of that. So will it take a bit more time at the beginning to set them up? Absolutely. Will it save you time once you get into the session and future sessions? 100%, tenfold. So when you say time consuming, remember, need-centered is not about what we do in the moment. It's what we do in the moment to have the impact in where we want to get to the lighthouse. So you providing clarity in a session, actually then there is no grey during the session. You don't have to stop and keep explaining, or there's a bit of confusion. But also in future sessions with that framework, that won't change. It will still be the same UAE. So when we go through it, once they're set up, Now, in 3-4 months' time, you might subtly adjust. Okay, so now what we thought was exceptional, that can become more acceptable now because we're better. But actually, they stay pretty consistent, and some won't change. So once you've set them up, the fundamentals you have within a defense, a transition, the behavior you're talking about of how we respond to things and what we're expecting to do when we lose a ball, or when we get in, we pass the ball, or how we're making space for somebody else, those are pretty constant. So yes, there is a little bit of time once we first go in, but you'll get that time back so much so often. But not only that, they'll provide clarity of reference, which makes the sessions so much easier to engage the players and drive the intensity. So this is where that clarity is the point that's going to save you time. Always that clarity at the beginning. Just think about, I'm spending a bit of time here because I know I'm going to get a return later. Always think back in the past when you were coaching, and when indeed if you were players before coaching, how many times was there confusion? How many times did we have to stop playing? Now the coach is having to remind us and talk us through stuff. How many times as a coach have you thought, well, why aren't they getting this? Hang on, I need to now reinforce. And that old thing about when people say reinforce, often it's reminding, often because we haven't got it clear at the beginning. So why are we reminding? Well, we could say reinforcement, but the reality is often that's because we didn't pre-agree clarity of reference, and we didn't keep that alive, and we didn't honor it as well. Remember, we talked about that in the tutorials as well. So when we get to this efficient process early on, yeah, okay, we're having to think about it, but as soon as we start to do a few, and it won't take long, it'll become second nature. It'll be so quick. And you've seen some of the videos of the video examples. I believe there's one from Evo Soccer in Sheffield where the players, within, I think it's 3 minutes, they set the whole session up. They, in their groups, they talk about the UAEs, what success is, bang, 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 how they're going to measure it, where the constraints come in, and off they go and explain to the coach. Coach asks a few questions and off they go. So that's how slick it can become. But obviously it's a new skill early on, but it won't take long. Just make sure you get them to see the value in why you're doing it, which players will get straight away, and they'll be thankful for you for doing it. Now the permissions, where does that sit in? Well, the permissions is letting players know what they can do without checking in with you first. Now I've put a few examples down there, and it's your judgment on how many you give. But remember, if we're developing teams that can adapt live, we want to develop leaders, we want to develop influencers, then actually the permissions is building that. And that's where we talk about building the right culture, building leadership, building interdependency. So it's a pre-agreement. Now, some of it may be on what they can do without checking in with you on the pitch, on the court. It may be to do with you when you're stepping in and they go, I'm giving you permission. If I'm stepping in, but you think you can fix it, say, coach, we've got this. If you say that to me, I will step back. Just to make sure, low, if you're saying it for everybody, not just the one or two. So that's another type of permission. And you can see I've put a couple down there as well. You've got that player called timeout. So I'm going to do another short about all the little interventions you can do. This is one where you can say to them, if and only if you can't fix in rule of two, i.e. you're saying stuff, people aren't 3A'ing it. It may be you just can't figure it out, and you're doing everything you can. They might say, okay, you've got, and you can give them both, or you can give them one where you can say 10 seconds or 30 seconds. Players can call it. It's as simple as timeout, coach. You've pre-agreed it's a 10-second they've got, or 30-second. They sprint in. You don't get involved in that. All you're allowed to do is you come round the back and you can listen in, but don't get involved. Don't say anything. And you're listening for what's going on, only to the point of, are they being effective? What are they saying they're going to do? Are they picking up what you've picked up? Then you step back and see if what they've said they're doing. So that's an example of an intervention of a permission. You can call these, but only if. And that's the beauty of framing that rule of three. So you can see that there's a few. I can build them as we go through some of the short tutorials I'm sharing here in this chapter. I'll add a few based on a feedback, but there's no limitation to this. It's what you feel, what you want the players to build on without you, and you're just preloading them to let them know they can do that without having to go, coach, is it all right if we do this? Or often they won't ask, but then at the end of a session might say, oh, I think we could have done this. And you're thinking, well, why didn't you? Oh, well, we weren't sure if we were allowed to, coach. So that's where the permissions come in. So there again, it's a pre-agreement. The what ifs are just a way to help future-proof actions past the present conversation and stimulate thought, just raise awareness to people of things that may happen in the future. So there's two key situations where you do it: in a situation of a match of practice, and then when they're unsupervised in their own time with their nutrition, their training, their planning. So in a match, if I use basket for an example, if a coach calls a timeout, and great element and advice I give to coaches that I mentor in basketball is, if you give a timeout when the player's sprinting, the first thing you ask is why have I called a timeout. If the opposition calls a timeout, then that coach asks the players why have they called a timeout, and it really stimulates the conversation. And then the players should be taken over specifically using the elements of the action review process to allow them understanding, tactical, technical, scanning, whatever it may be, commitment, execution. Once you get there, where the what ifs will come in is they've given you the solutions, they've given you the strategy. However, you know the opposition coach, and that's where the coaches have the extra expertise and experience. And you know, in these situations, the coach may well get his team or her team to do this. So the what if question would be, okay, you give me the answers. What if they do this? What if they go man-to-man marking? Now, straight away, because the athletes, your team hasn't connected that, go, okay, so if you do this, coach, we're going to be doing this. Great. And it may be individual, where it's specific to an individual player, where you say, okay, Danny, what if your opposition starts doing this now? And then Danny, okay, well, if he starts doing this, I'm going to be ready for this. This is what I'm going to change. And you go, okay, great. And you just make them aware. Now, that's very different than the player's giving you some answers, and then you as a coach saying, oh, and don't forget, if they do this, remember we need to do this, blah, blah, blah. One is now we don't know what's going in, same situation as before, but also we're not engaging them in their understanding and their strategizing, the very people that will need to strategize in the matches. So we practice this all the time. We practice it in practice. We get them to connect. Now, the more we do it, the less what ifs we'll have to do, because they'll start connecting. They'll start saying it for themselves. And we see younger age group teams I work with, 9, 10, 11-year-old, you will see the players being able to do this and think a little bit ahead, be a bit more cunning. The other situation you can do it is, say, for instance, an example, someone has a training plan and it all looks great, and I'm going to train on these days, these evenings, and then you say, brilliant. So what if now the gym's closed or you can't get to the gym? What are you going to do then? Well, I could use my bands, and great. So let's look at a plan for that. Can you sort that out yourself, or do you need to speak to the S&C coach? And again, if you're an S&C coach on this course, you could be asking these questions. And then go, okay, great. Now you've got it together. Brilliant. We'll call that yellow option. So what we can agree then is, in our peer support group, that's WhatsApp, Teams, Slack, whatever you're using, is when we know they're scheduled to do their green in their own time, their training, and all of a sudden they can't get to the gym, out of their control, then they just message and go, coach, can't get to the gym, I'm doing the yellow option. So now the coach, the SNC, has to be obviously in that loop. It's relevant to them. They understand, okay, they've worked on this, no problem. Now I know where their expectations are on the training. And these are where the what ifs comes in. What you're basically doing is you're raising awareness to things in the future that they may need to be thinking about now to help them be successful in the future. So you can see the two elements there where they work together. So that's basically using the what ifs. So reflections on that, please leave it in the comments below. What you took from this, has it given you better clarity, and how can you connect with that? Share ideas, because obviously other coaches are going to be listening to this. You might give them another example, another idea. And remember, when you go away and do something and you get a little best practice, share that in the comment as well. This is about helping each other. So there you go, basics on UAEs, on the what ifs, and on the permissions.